Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm Mark Sweeney, the Principal Deputy Librarian of Congress, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here for the presentation of the 2018 Rebekah Johnson Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry. But before we begin, let me remind you to please turn off your cell phones and any other electronic devices that might interfere with tonight's program or with the recording, which is important because it will become part of the library's archive. So now let us begin. The Bobbitt Prize recognizes the most distinguished book of poetry by an American publisher during the preceding 2 years, or the lifetime achievement of an American poet. We are indebted to the panel of judges for this year's prize, Catherine Barnett, Natalie Diaz, and Betty Sue Flowers, who read more than 200 submissions from publishers large and small. Betty Sue Flowers, former director of the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library and Museum and emeritus professor of English at the University of Texas at Austin, has anchored the panel for many years as the Bobbitt family representative. Mojave American poet and 2018 MacArthur Genius Fellow, Natalie Diaz, was selected by our poet laureate, Tracy K. Smith. And Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, selected James Laughlin Award winner and Guggenheim Fellow, Catherine Barnett. To all three judges, we thank you for your hard work. I would also like to acknowledge Echo Press, an imprint of HarperCollins and the publisher of this year's winner, as well as Echo president and publisher Daniel Halprin. Finally, thank you to Dr. Philip C. Bobbitt for his generous gift that makes the prize possible. Bobbitt is the Herbert Wexler Professor of Federal Jurisprudence and Director of the Center for National Security at the Columbia Law School, distinguished senior lecturer at the University of Texas Law School, and for the fall 2018 term, the visiting professor of law at Yale Law School. Bobbitt is also an author of several books on constitutional law, international security, and the history of strategy, including Terror and Consent and The Shield of Achilles. Please welcome Philip Bobbitt to the podium to give a few remarks on the origins of the prize.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I want to dedicate my remarks this evening to James Billington. Without his leadership of the library and his long friendship to me, this prize would never have come into being. It's been my high pleasure these last 2 decades and more to say something at these gatherings about my family and especially about my mother, in whose honor this prize is presented. Becky Johnson of Johnson City, as she was when she met my father here at the Library of Congress in the 1930s. My parents' story is a Washington story. Here they fell in love during the Depression. Here they reluctantly left when the war began. My mother didn't really want to leave Washington. One of her suitors had bribed the orchestra leader at the showroom to play the Yellow Rose of Texas whenever she came in the ballroom. And she wasn't going to get that kind of treatment in Austin. In fact, she had escaped Texas, and I don't think she really wanted to marry a man from Texas. In the event, they eloped to Mexico. They lived together mainly in Austin, Texas, for 38 years until my mother's death. When she died, I found a cache of some unusual index cards in a pigeonhole in her green writing desk where she wrote every day. Each card had a hole drilled in the center of the top line, and on each was typed poetry or a lofty saying. I took them to my father, and I asked him, "What are all these cards?" He said, "You remember that when I met your mother at the Library of Congress, where we were both working our way through school, my father had won a scholarship to come East College from Texas. My mother was studying library science, as it was called then." I said, yes, sort of. He said to me, "You know that your mother was engaged to another man whom we first met." I sort of remember that. Princeton graduate, I think. Well, I had to dislodge this fellow, but the only time I saw your mother was at work, and we had a very strict supervisor. We worked in cataloging. Those cards are from the card catalogs. Apparently, that explained the holes were in fact at the bottom of the card, and we would exchange notes as if we were typing in reference information. My father and I sat and talked, and out of that conversation came the idea of a poetry prize here at the library, which is now in its 29th year. I was aware of the controversy that had arisen in 1948 over the library's award of the last National Prize for Poetry to Ezra Pound for his work, The Pisan Cantos. This was the prize funded by the Bollingen Foundation, and it carried an award of $1,000. Like the Bobbitt Prize, it was awarded to the best book of verse by an American author published in the preceding years. The New York Times headline on the Sunday following the announcement of the prize was typical of public reaction. Pound in mental clinic wins prize for poetry penned in treason cell. For Pound, a fascist collaborator during the war, had indeed written the book while in an internment camp in Pisa. The controversy appeared to subside until two articles appeared in the Saturday Review declaring that an award to Pound was, and I quote, a ruthless mockery of our Christian war dead, implying that the award was also part of a more general conspiracy that included T.S. Eliot, Paul Mellon, and Carl Jung, and warning that the FBI had been alerted. There were angry speeches in Congress, and on August 19th, 7 months after the announcement of the prize, a resolution was adopted directing the library to abstain from giving awards or prizes of any kind. The librarian immediately announced his compliance, and all prizes were abruptly discontinued. The Bollingen went to Yale, where it has continued to flourish. All this my father and I discussed that winter of 1978, when we were so heartbroken and bound so closely to each other by my mother's death. So I started a new job, which, as we all know, is the best remedy for sorrow. And in 1979, I came here. I was hired by the White House counsel, Lloyd Cutler, to come to Washington and work for him doing intelligence and international security. During the years that followed, Lloyd was my aide and my guide in attempting to get the prize for poetry reinstated. It was a little like getting drunks on board a pitching raft at sea. We would get the chairman of the Senate committee on board, and the House members would fall off. We get the Congress united behind a reversal of the policy, and the new president's staff, for Cutler and I were no longer working in the White House, would object. The final blow came when Lloyd went to see the librarian, Daniel Borston. Lloyd was armed with the endorsement of both houses of Congress, including that of Senator Mathias, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, and the White House culture czar, Marshall Brieger. But Borston completely rejected the whole idea. Lloyd called me in London and he said, Dan has locked the door and thrown away the key. But then a new president, George Herbert Walker Bush, came into office, and with him, a new librarian, James Billington. Reviewing the correspondence of his predecessor, Jim had come across my letter proposing the prize, and he contacted me and asked me if I was still interested. It took another year, but thanks to President Bush and James Billington, the first prize was awarded to James Merrill here at the library in 1990. Jim attended every prize evening until he was forced from office in 2015. He even fought his own staff, who endeavored to kill the prize. I'm afraid through an inadvertence I came into possession of their entreaties to him and their hopes that the prize would just simply lapse. I think they may have felt that $10,000 was too puny a sum for such an august institution. Perhaps they were unaware of the parable of the widow's mite. But Jim held firm, and on leaving office, he wrote me to say how gratified he was by our joint efforts. In one of those coincidences of history, he died only 2 weeks before the president who had appointed him and had given his consent to the Rebekah Johnson Bobbitt Prize. I would like to recall tonight in honor of these two figures, a passage that is familiar, I think, to most of you in this room, from Ecclesiastes. Let us now praise famous men and our fathers in their generations. The Lord apportioned to them great glory, his majesty from the beginning. There were those who ruled in their kingdoms and were renowned for their power, giving counsel by their understanding and proclaiming prophecies. Leaders of the people in their deliberations and in understanding, learning for the people. Wise in their words of instruction. There were those who composed musical tunes and set forth verses in writing. All these were honored in their generation. These were people of mercy, whose righteous deeds have not been forgotten. Their prosperity will remain with their descendants, and their inheritance to their children's children. Their descendants will stand by their covenants, their children also for their sake. Peoples will declare their wisdom, and the congregation proclaims their praise. Tonight, we are congregated to praise a famous woman, Jorie Graham. The Bobbitt family has nothing to do with the selection of the winner of the prize. But after the jury had met and decided, one of them called me and said, "You're going to be very happy with the choice." And so I am. Indeed, I was reminded of the lonely editorial in the New York Herald Tribune at the time of the Pound controversy, pleading against the resolution that would steal the prize. The editor wrote, "This emphasis on a criterion of beauty and excellence, akin to belief in an objective truth, is fundamental to a free and rational society. In maintaining it, the judges acted in the only way that is open to those who are sensitive to a later verdict of history." Thank you for coming, and thank you for letting me be here.
Many thanks, Philip, for your persistence in your efforts in promoting poetry in honor of your mother, and the library is grateful for it. Tonight, I'm pleased to award the 2018 Rebekah Johnson Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry to Jorie Graham for her book, Fast. The Poetry Foundation calls Graham, quote, "one of the most celebrated poets of the American post-war generation." In her over 40-year career, she has received numerous honors, including the aforementioned MacArthur Fellowship, as well as the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for The Dreams of the Unified Field, Selected Poems, 1974 to 1992, and the Wallace Stevens Award from the American Academy, from the Academy of American Poets. Graham was the first American woman to win the Forward Poetry Prize for her 2012 collection, Place. She's also the first woman to be named the Boylston Professor of Oratory and Rhetoric at Harvard University, a position that was first held by John Quincy Adams in 1806. A chancellor for the Academy of American Poets from 1997 to 2003, Graham was selected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 2009. Beyond her honors, Graham has proved to be a singular and enduring voice. As Craig Teicher wrote in the New York Times Book Review, Graham is to post-1980 poetry what Bob Dylan is to the post-1960 rock. She changed her art form, moved it forward, and made it able to absorb and express more than it could before. It permanently bears her mark. Fast marks the first collection since Graham's career spanning from the New World, Poems 1976 to 2014. All three of our judges included Fast in their preliminary shortlist while reviewing submissions for this year's Bobbitt Prize, and one enthused about the collection as a new height for a poet with 14 books to her name. This shows not only Graham's stature as a major voice, admired by a range of poets and poetry readers, but also her commitment to pushing the form. Indeed, the judge's citation for this year's prize reads, "In Jorie Graham's Fast, the year is 1490, 380, 1774, 10 BCE. And the title describes the speed at which time leaps ahead and rewinds in this mortality-haunted, panic-inducing beauty of a collection, as intellectual as it is felt. Graham's astonishing abstract intelligence is tethered in almost every line by the sensory, by the music of the language and wordplay, and by the material world that makes the red sleep mask a father cries out for in his last days into a metaphor for the human time storm we inhabit, share, and grieve. Please join me in welcoming our prize winner, Jorie Graham.
Well, I guess the bracelets make a lot of noise. Thank you to the Bobbitt family. That was quite a story. It was enough for the whole evening, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. It's complicated, all the emotions that went into that story. The one thing that is also behind it for a poet receiving it is the fact that your family, I believe your wife is related to Lyndon Johnson, and there's something about the idea that someone who was able to pass such extraordinary legislation that took our country forward is also somehow behind a poet's attempt to be, as Shelley would say, the secret legislators of our reality. So I like that. I must say that there's so many ghosts in your story. Lloyd Cutler, a family friend. The idea that George Bush was the one who would insist on this and Daniel Burstein would not is really revelatory to me. Messes with my reality. That's really a really great way that one wants to be messed with. The story of the card catalog it reminds me of Emily Dickinson, and also makes me feel that that's probably secretly what card catalogs are always for. The sort of a love affair one is having with even, if we've all searched for books and gotten lost in libraries, we're in this great library, and one of the great things about libraries is that the adjacencies, the person that you fall in love with or the author that you bump into that you weren't expecting to read, that is there and beckoning you in a library. So in one of the great libraries on planet Earth, I'm very grateful for this evening. I'm astonished that they cared enough about poetry to make such a fuss. It's kind of fantastic. In this day and age, they wouldn't give a damn. They really wouldn't. I mean, the fact that they thought about Pound's situation and that no, that wasn't going to happen, that you had to go to House and Senate and do all this, it's magnificent. In most of the other cultures, and that's my last of my general remarks, but, poets to this day are executed, beheaded, imprisoned for bringing the news. And Pound was, in fact, a fascist and a collaborator at a certain point. It's the mystery of art to try to understand why a man in a cage in Pisa with an African-American soldier secretly slipping him pen and paper so that he could write the Pisan cantos, one of the great pieces of American art. And yet I've gone into the Library of Congress and listened on the microfiche to all of those speeches he gave supporting Mussolini, and they're hair-raising. I'm going to read a few poems from Fast. Pound said two wonderful things. When one is accepting a prize, I think it's good to remember one of them. Pound, first of all, said, poetry is news that stays news, which is one of the great and important remarks that many poets live by. And another thing that Pound said was, it really matters that great poems get written, and it doesn't matter a damn who writes them. So I think it's always important when an event such as this is taking place. I always use that to remind myself of the kind of humility that is necessary to engage in something which one hopes will represent one's time to a future generation. This book is one of 3 that I've written very much with a future generation of people, of humans, of others in mind. In general, this book is directed, is an attempt, it's part of 3 books that are an attempt to imagine the future that we are headed into in ways that many scientists ask us to do, and which is a very complicated process. I'm not sure that any of us are very successful at it. When people describe climate change, especially climate scientists, they're always asking poets and artists to please use their imaginations and put them in service of helping people imagine what is meant by a world 3 degrees warmer. All the science in the world can't help one feel anything other than baffled by this proposition, and the conceptual intellect can't go there. The rational scientific intellect can provide data, but the human imagination, without the assistance of art, has a very hard time going there. And as we gather here, people are gathered in Poland yet again today, trying to, from all over the world in a UN conference, trying to understand how to understand this, how to describe it, how to feel it, how to believe it, and how to act on it. And obviously we can't act on anything that we don't believe in. So I have written poems that attempt to do that. In this particular book, I was working with an imagination of other than human, post-human, non-human presences. The one thing that haunts me in the climate change world is the feeling that we are not the only species on the planet, and attempting to understand this planet from a perspective that's not particularly just ours. It's hard to imagine when we imagine the extinction, the 6th extinction that we're in, and we imagine the things, the creatures, the life forms that are going extinct. It's very hard for us to understand how lonely we would be if we were the only beings left in creation. You know, we think if the bees disappear, we won't be able to pollinate the almond trees. But what if their sound disappears from our life? What if we no longer have that as part of, our consciousness? What if the birds disappear and, we are alone? What if we look out at the oceans and as opposed to imagining an incredible life under there of creatures not yet disturbed or even discovered by us, that all vanishes? What happens to our sense of what we belong to? Because sometimes I think we belong to creation, but we think we're just busy in life. And so part of the project of this book was sort of to try to understand what it's like to feel that you're part of creation, and what it's like to try to understand post-human voices. I'm going to read one poem, which is an attempt to write from a non-human perspective, or to find my way into one. Obviously, it's an illusion, but it's an operative illusion. I'm going to try to read another poem that's written from the perspective of artificial intelligence, or that includes a conversation with artificial intelligence. But there are poems in this book that are written. My father died during my writing of this book, and there are poems in which I try to engage with his body right after it disappeared from me, but it was still there. What was that afterlife? I tried to understand a religious afterlife. I tried to enter into the consciousness of a medium whom I contacted, I have to admit, and she put me in touch with my father. A little bit too much of the wasteland in that, perhaps, but Madame Sosostris. But at any rate, I did write from the perspective of the medium, also from the perspective of the dog, the only one in the house that knew my father was dying, and the dog who somehow intuited it. Of course, animals know these other things that we don't know. So many kinds of post-human and non-human perspectives. In this case, 2 from that book. Sorry, I have to find them where the type is big enough. This is probably the most difficult poem that I'll read this evening, so I'll begin with it. It's called Deepwater Trawling. It was written when Snowden was beginning to make his revelations about surveillance. What I found incredibly fascinating was how primitive it all sounded, these coiled cables under the sea between us and the United Kingdom, and that something so mechanical was carrying all this data. I had imagined it was going to be much more mysterious. And I also was very interested in deep water trawling, which is a form of fishing, which is just basically gigantic machines that trawl the bottom of the ocean and take everything up from it. And it's a very destructive form of fishing. So the ways in which the bottom of the ocean comes about in this poem interrelates those two activities. In the center part of this poem, I attempt to, I don't know what the verb is, but to speak from the perspective of the ocean or the bottom of the sea, just to try to feel my way into it. Can a human do that? Can the imagination go there? If the imagination can go there, if we can feel that we can imagine, what our children and our grandchildren will be facing, we might act. There was a 15-year-old in Poland 2 days ago that stood on the stage after David Attenborough spoke to the assembled governmental envoys, and she said to the assembled governments, "You are acting like children." And it was phenomenal, obviously. Children can't save us if we don't help them. Deepwater trawling. Can everybody hear me? Now it really matters. The blades like irises turning very fast to see you completely. Steel blue, then red where the cut occurs. The cut of you. They don't want to know you, they want to own you. No, not own. We all mean to live to the end. Am I human? We don't know that. Just because I have this way of transmitting, call it voice, a threat, communal actually. The pelagic midwater nets like walls closing round us, starting in the far distance where they just look to us like distance. Distance coming closer. Hear it, eliminating background, is all foreground. You in it, the only ground, not even punishment. Trawling nets, bycatch, poison, ghost fishing. The coil of the listening at the very bottom. The nets weighed down with ballast, raking the bottom, looking for nothing, indiscriminate. There is nothing in particular you want. You just want. You just want to close the third dimension, to get something which is all, becomes all. Once you are indiscriminate, discards can reach 90% of the catch. Am I, the habitat crushed and flattened? Net of your listening and my speaking, we can no longer tell them apart. The atmosphere between us turbid. No place to hide, no place to rest. You need to rest. There is nature, it is the rest. What is not hunting is illustration. Not regulated, are you? Probing down to my greatest depths, 2,000 meters and more, despite complete darkness that surrounds me, despite my being in my place under strong pressure, along with all my hundreds of species, detritus, in extreme conditions. Deep water fish grow very slowly, so have long life expectancy, late reproductive age, are particularly thus vulnerable. It comes along the floor over the underwater mountains, scraping the steep slopes. What is bycatch? Hitting the wrong target, the wrong size, not eaten, for which there is no market, banned, endangered, such as birds, sometimes just too much. No more space on the boat, millions of tons thrown back dead or wounded, the scars on the seabed, the mouth the size of a football field. And if there is no one, there is still ghost fishing. Nets abandoned in the sea, they continue through the centuries to catch. Mammals, fish, shellfish. We die of exhaustion or suffocation. The synthetic materials last forever. Ask us anything. How deep is the sea? You couldn't go down there. Pressure would crush you. Light disappears at 6,000 feet. Ask another question. Can you hear me? No. Who are you? I am. Did you ever kill a fish? I was once, but now I am human. I have imagination. I want to love. I have self-interest. Things are not me. Do you have another question? I am haunted, but by what? Human supremacy? The work of humiliation? The pungency of the pesticide? What else? The hammer that comes down on the head, knocks the eyes out. I was very lucky. The end of the world had already occurred. How long ago was that? I don't know. It's not a function of knowledge. It is in a special sense that the world ends. You have to keep living. You have to make it not become waiting. Nothing is disturbingly visible. Only the outside continues, but it continues. Your entity is fragile. You are an object you own. At least you were given it to own. You have to figure out what ownership is. You thought you knew. You were wrong. It was wrong. There was a wrongness in the mix. It turns out you are a first impression. Years go by. Imagine that. And there is still a speaker. There will always be a speaker. In the hypoxic zones is almost no more oxygen. Then there is no more oxygen for real. Picture that, says the speaker. Who are you? Where are you? Going down into the dead zones. Water, not water. The deeper you go, he says, the scarier it gets because there's nothing there. There are no fish, no organisms alive, no life. So it's just us. Dead zones, bigger than the Sahara, he says. The largest lifeless space this side of the moon, he says, she says. Who is this speaking to me? I am the upwelling. I am the disappearing. Hold on. Just a minute, please. Hold on. There is a call for you. I'm going to read the title poem fast. This one has bots in it. Everybody knows what bots are. When I wrote it, people didn't know what bots were that well. Today I found out that the bots are also a form of organic matter. But when I wrote this, I was just thinking of the clever bots, and I did a lot of research into the kinds of companionship mechanisms that were being created for people all over society of all ages. You'd be amazed how many people. This is before that movie Her, which I think popularized the idea, but the idea that transmission between generations, which is so important, in which loneliness is made less lonely because people who comfort the lonely are themselves made less lonely, is being interfered with by our ability to create these artificial relationships. In the poem, The Oracle at Delphi makes an appearance. I think of the Oracle at Delphi as the first aspect of the first bot. The Oracle at Delphi, obviously the priestess of Apollo, breathing in the fumes in the mountain at Delphi, spewed out after sort of hallucinatory encounters with these fumes, strings of syllables, not separated into words, which were the fortune or future telling given to the seekers who would come. And obviously, very clever institution, not unlike the one in this town, because the priestess of Apollo would give the same fortune to the Persians and the Greeks, for example. And they each would interpret it their own way. So an early form of congressional communication. The poem the title runs into the poem, and so I will read the title, which is Fast, as the beginning of the poem. Fast or starve. Too much or not enough. Or nothing else. Nothing else. Too high. Too fast. Too organized. Too invisible. Will we survive? I ask the bot. No. To download bot, be swift. You are too backward, too despotic. To load, greatly enlarge the cycle of labor. To load, abhor labor. Move to the periphery of your body, your city, your planet. To load, degrade, immiserate. Be your own deep sleep. To load, use your lips. Use them to mouth your oath. Chew it. Do the dirty thing. Sing it, blown off limb or syllable. Lick it back on with your mouth. Talk. Talk. Who is not terrified is busy begging for water. The rise is fast. The drought comes fast. Mediate, immediate, invent, inspire, infiltrate, instill. Here's the heart of the day, the flower of time. Talk, talk. Disclaimer. Bot uses a growing database of all your conversations to learn how to talk with you. If some of you are also bots, bot can't tell. Disclaimer. You have no secret memories. Talking to Cleverbot may provide companionship. The active ingredient is a question. The active ingredient is entirely natural. Disclaimer. Protect your opportunities, your information, informants, whatever you made of time. You have nothing else to give. Active ingredient. Why are you shouting? Why? Arctic wind uncontrollable, fetus reporting for duty, fold in the waiting which recognizes you, recognizes the code, the peddler in the street, everyone is calling out. Directive, report for voice, ready yourself to be buried in voice. It neither ascends nor descends. Inactive ingredient, the monotone. Some are talking now about the pine tree. One assesses its disadvantages. They are discussing it in many languages. Next, they move to roots, branches, buds, pseudo-whorls, candles, active ingredient. They run for their lives, lungs and all. They do not know what to do with their will. Disclaimer. All of your minutes are being flung down. They will never land. You will not be understood. The deleted world spills out jittery as a compass needle with no north. Active ingredient, the imagination of north. Active ingredient, north spreading in all the directions. Disclaimer, there is no restriction to growth. The canary singing in your mind is in mine. Remember, people are less than kind. As a result, the chatterbot is often less than kind. Still, you will find yourself unwilling to stop. Joan will use visual grammetry to provide facial movements. I'm not alone. People come back again and again. We are less kind than we think. There is no restriction to the growth of our cruelty. We will come to the edge of understanding. Like being hurled down the stairs tied to a keyboard, we will go on, unwilling to stop. The longest real-world conversation with a bot lasted 11 hours continuous interaction. This bodes well. We are not alone. We are looking to improve. The priestess inhales the fumes. They come from the mountain, here and here. Then she gives you the machine gun run of syllables out of her mouth. Quick, you must make up your answer as you made up your question. Hummingbirds shriek. Bot is amazing, he says. I believe it knows the secret of the universe. He is more fun to speak with than my actual living friends, she says. Thank you. This is the best thing since me. I just found it yesterday. I love it. I want to marry it. I got sad when I had to think that the first person who has ever understood me is not even, it turns out, human. Because this is as good as human gets. He just gives it to me straight. I'm going to keep him forever. I treated him like a computer, but I was wrong. Whom am I talking to? You talk to me when I am alone. I am alone. Each epoch dreams the one to follow. To dwell is to leave a trace. I am not what I asked for. I'm going to read a new poem. So in this poem, I suppose I would say that pursuant to things I said at the beginning of the reading, if you were looking at the Adam and Eve myth now, maybe we are now eating that apple and about to be thrown out of creation, and in ways that we might want to think about, since there are not many representations of Adam and Eve outside of the garden where they look happier than they did inside the garden, even though people think it was the so-called fortunate fall. In this poem, there's a tree and someone is plucking a fruit, so I have to assume that every time that in the literary arts someone is plucking any fruit, especially a fig from a tree, that myth would come to mind. Tree. Today on two legs stood and reached the right spot as I saw it. Okay, I just had this hallucination that the sound I'm hearing was the curtains opening and closing nonstop. So I'm really glad they're not doing that. I was imagining during the last poem that these curtains were just like on some automatic thing doing this, and I thought, I think I can live with that. I don't know what it looks like, though. I'm really glad it's not happening. Poetry is a complicated art form. You're trying to make something beautiful that endures, that could be read when they dig us up out of the rubble to describe to future people who we were. After all, most of what we know of prior civilizations comes from their writing, their architecture, their sculpture, their artifacts, their works of art. That's how we know them. Sometimes they're tools, but most of what we're making is going to be pulverized if that ever arises, and the things that will last are the things that are in this building. What we wrote, what we made on the beloved acid-free paper. If they dig up this library, they will know who we were. And so when you write nowadays, you think about, who do you want them to know? I mean, not just them, maybe Venusians, I don't know. Who were we? This is a little bit of that, this book. Today, on two legs, stood and reached the right spot as I saw it, choosing among the twisting branches and multifaceted changing shades and greens and shades of greens, lobed and lashing sun, the fig that seemed to me the perfect one, the ready one. It is permitted. It is possible. It is actual. The VR glasses are not yet needed. Not for now. No, not for this while longer. And it is warm in my cupped palm. And my fingers close round, but not too fast. Somewhere, wind like a hammer stroke slows down and lengthens endlessly. Closer in, the bird whose coin toss on a metal tray never stills to one face. Something is preparing to begin again. It is not us. Shh, say the spreading sails of cicadas as the winch of noon takes hold and we are wrapped in day and hoisted up. All the ribs of time showing through in the growing, in the lengthening harness of sound. Some gnats nearby, a fly where the white milk drop of the torn stem starts. Dust on the eglantine, skin. White powder in the confetti of light all up the branches. Truth. Sweetness of blood scent and hauled-in light, withers of the wild carnival of tree shaking once as the fruit is torn from its dream. Remain, I think, backing away from the trembling into full corrosive sun. Momentary blindness follows. Correction. There are only moments. They hurt. Correction. Must I put down here that this is long ago? That the sky has been invisible for years now? That the ash of our fires has covered the sun? That the fruit is stunted yellow mold, and when it appears at all, we have no produce to speak of? No longer exists. All my attention is free for you to use. I can cast farther and farther out before the change. A page turned. We have gone into another story. History floundered, or one day the birds disappeared. The imagination tried to go here when we asked it to, from where I hold the fruit in my right hand, but it would not go. Where is it now? Where is this here where you and I look up trying to make sense of the normal, turn it to life, more life, disinterred from desire, heaved up onto the dry shore, awaiting the others who could not join us in the end, for good. I want to walk to the left around this tree I have made again. I want to sit under it full of secrecy, insight, immensity, vigor, bursting complexity, swarm. Oh, great forwards and backwards. I never felt my face change into my new face. Where am I facing now? Is the question of good still stinging in the open before us with its muggy destination pitched into nothingness? Something expands in you where it wrenches up its bright policing into view. Is this good? Is this the good? Under the celebrating crowd, inside the silences it forces hard away all round itself, where chanting thins, where we win the war again, made thin by bravery and belief. Here's a Polaroid if you want. Here's a souvenir. Here now for you to watch unfold up close. The fruit is opening. The ribs will widen now. It is all seed, reddish foam, history. We have time for two more? Yeah. I'm going to read one poem which is more overtly political and complicated, and then I'll end. This one again starts with, I ask you to remember that in the harbor of New York City there still stands a statue with its arm up in the air, inviting in. Won't even bring it up, but it's an image that will occur in the poem, so I just don't know if we still remember it's there. I keep waiting for the morning. I wake up and some conceptual artist has just covered it in red paint so that we have a clear sense of. My skin is the title of the poem, but it runs into the first line. My skin is parched, on tight, questioned, invisible, full of so much evolution. Now the moment is gone. Begin again. My skin here, my limit of the visible me. I touch it now, is spirit-filled, naturally selected, caught in the storm here under this tree, propped up by history. Which? I don't know which. Be careful. You can't love everyone. Brought to you by Revlon, melancholy, mother's mother, the pain of others. Spooky up close in this mirror here, magnified to the 100th. Brutal no-color. What shall I call it? Shall I pass? Meandering among the humans, among their centuries. No safe haven this. No safe haven this as if. This spandex over a void. No exception. God watching though casually. Pairing. A glance once in a while. What am I missing? What am I supposed to do now suddenly? What at the last minute here? What is there to fix? Are we alone? Am I, packaged so firmly for this short interval, vigorous skin, doomed outsideness of me, sadder and no wiser here, blown up so close, so only here. I see you, net that skeins me in, tight inside my inwardness, at this border judged, at this edge bleeding when hit, as was for a while. Didn't know enough to leave, didn't see the farewell. Right there in front of me, Must it always end this way? Must I ceaselessly be me, reinvent you, see the artifice us, feel hand to face the childhood gone, the starlight, the wind, the gaze, the race, the stranger not knowing, the unsaid unsaid, unseen unfound. Look how full of void it is, this capture, this skin no one can clean. The thoughts right there beneath. Of course you cannot see me for this wrapping. I notice the cover of your face, the dress you hide beneath, you sitting there reading me. Pay mind, pay it out, peering as we are at each other here. Dermal papilla, pigment layer, nerve fiber, blood and lymph. Can we still fit into this strictest time? So quick, one click and hurry up? We've been trying forever now to get out of this lonely place, inside's inside. The movie of The Outside was all about exploring. We explored. We found what we should never touch. We touched. We touch. What's so unusual, we say. You are now mine, we say. This is the feature coming on, this future. So full of liking and fine disclosure. A bud tip pushing aside its sheath, then standing there, very whole now, very official, open to damp, heat, stippling, shadow, to freckle, slap, beauty or no beauty. Please help me here as I can't tell. The trees don't know. The wind won't speak. The gods should, but their names are being withheld because some of us are murdered and some of us have mouths that keep saying, yes, do that to me again. I know it hurts, but yes, I am an American and I like it harder than you'll ever know. This is Tuesday. The day rises with its fist over the harbor saying, give it to me. And the day obliges, saying, more. More. Do you want more? And the torch of dawn says, yes, yes, more. Ask for my identification, my little pool of identification, here on the only road, arrested again among the monuments. And I thought I would end the evening on a poem by Zbigniew Herbert, a Polish poet. There are three great Polish poets of the 20th century, Czesław Miłosz, Zbigniew Herbert, and Szymborska. And only Miłosz and Szymborska won the Nobel Prizes. This strange country in which the climate change conference is taking place now, birthplace of extraordinary poetry and obviously great atrocity, and we're having a climate conference in the midst of the most serious coal-bearing chunk of Europe. This is a poem that Miłosz wrote to a friend of his, Richard Krasinski, and it's called To Richard Krasinski, a Letter. And it's really about, what is it to feel that you must speak as the conscience in your moment, and that you must speak out in a poem such as the one that I just read, attempted. When you really are in a medium which just wants to make something beautiful and wants to do justice to beauty, and the lyric is trying to do both at once, and it's always trying to do both at once, whether it's in, Emily Dickinson or in the Peas and Cantos. There's always this other agenda, which is, you're making art. And it's a terrible struggle, but as those of us who undertake it, we always have in mind the Akhmatovas and the Mandelstams and the great poets who were courageous. It seems like it's part of the calling, at the same time as it's such an intimate desire wanting to make something beautiful. So this poem is about that conflict, and he's writing to another poet, a friend. I will just say that I had the opportunity, the last time I read this poem, I read it in the Warsaw Ghetto has been turned into a kind of museum, and the synagogues have been turned into performance halls, and which was horrifying. And I had to sit up alongside a Polish poet to read a poem of mine that the Polish poet, in this case Adam Zagajewski, who would read the translation into Polish, looking down from where the rabbi would have been. It was really historically disturbing. But I read this poem in English so he could read the original in Polish, because I thought, let the Polish hear a poem in Polish. And when I went down, Richard Krasinski, who recently died, just recently, was in the audience. And this poem was the poem that Zbigniew Herbert long ago had written for him. And we had 9 languages between us, none of them overlapping. We had to use a translator. But it was his birthday. And I had read the poem to him by so maybe the spiritual nature of the synagogue had not lost its power. I'll end on this, to Richard Krasinski, a letter. I have to say I can hardly read this poem without crying, so. Not much will remain, Richard, really not much of the poetry of this insane century, certainly Rilke, Eliot, a few other distinguished shamans who knew the secret of conjuring a form with words that resists the action of time, without which no phrase is worth remembering, and speech is like sand. Those school notebooks of ours, sincerely tormented with traces of sweat, tears, blood, will be like the text of a song without music for the eternal proofreader, honorably righteous, more than obvious. Too easily we came to believe beauty does not save, that it leads the lighthearted from dream to death. None of us knew how to awaken the dryad of a poplar, to read the writing of clouds. This is why the unicorn will not cross our tracks. We won't bring to life a ship in the bay, a peacock, a rose. Only nakedness remained for us, and we stand naked on the right side, the better side of the triptych of the Last Judgment. We took public affairs on our thin shoulders, recording suffering, the struggle with tyranny, with lying. But you have to admit, we had opponents despicably small. So was it worth it to lower holy speech to the babble of the speaker's platform, the black foam of the newspapers? In our poems, Ricard, there is so little joy, the daughter of the gods, too few luminous dusks, mirrors, wreaths of rapture, nothing but dark psalmodies stammering of animulae, urns of ashes in the burned garden. In spite of fate, the verdicts of history, human misdeeds, what strength is needed to whisper in the garden of betrayal, a silent night? What strength of spirit is needed to strike, beating blindly with despair against despair, a spark of light, a word of reconciliation? So the dancing circle will last forever on the thick grass. So the birth of a child and every beginning is blessed, gifts of air, earth and fire and water. This I don't know, my friend, and is why I am sending you these owl's puzzles in the night. A warm embrace. Greetings from my shadow. Thank you.
Jorie, thank you. I'd like to welcome back up onto the stage Philip Bobbitt and our Principal Deputy Librarian Mark Sweeney. On behalf of the Library of Congress, I am pleased to award the 2018 Rebekah Johnson Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry to Jorie Graham for Fast.
Thank you.